Chapter 8. Monday, February the 10th. The bulletin board outside the gym had two enormous pictures of Peter Winfield on it from Friday's basketball game. In gym class, Coach Stevens picked 6 guys to go to a special weekend baseball camp. Ethan Winfield was not one of them. Whoever invented alphabetical order every single time, every single teacher starts with A last names and ends with Z ones. Is it just a coincidence that the president and vice president of Losers Incorporated both have last names from the end of the alphabet? Ethan was sitting in Miss Lee's 6th period English class, waiting for the stragglers to come in from study hall and scribbling a couple of quick entries in Life Isn't Fair a proof. He had been so busy lately bouncing balls and reading Dickens that he had gotten behind in his record keeping, and these days fewer unfair things seemed to be happening in his immediate vicinity. Or maybe he was just too preoccupied with the rest of his life to notice them. It was book report day, and Ethan knew that Miss Leeds would start with Lizzie, as all of teachers always started with Lizzie, and she'd get to Ethan and Julius if there was time, which there probably wouldn't be, since there were 24 kids in the class, and Lizzie could easily fill half of a class period all by herself. Ethan looked down again at the page he had written on A Tale of Two Cities. If he had to wait till tomorrow to get his report over with, he didn't think he could stand it, especially this time, when his report was practically guaranteed to astonish everybody, most of all Miss Leeds. The bell rang. Miss Leeds looked up from her cluttered desk. She was a small, gray-haired woman who smiled so much that her face had frozen into a perpetually smiling expression. "Let's get started right away," Miss Leeds said. "I want to make sure we hear as many book reports as possible today. Lizzie, what do you have to share with us?" Lizzie came to the front of the room. Most kids read their reports from a sheet of paper. Some just mumbled something they thought of on the spot. Lizzie's book reports were always memorized. She clasped her hands behind her back, fixed her eyes somewhere on the ceiling, and let loose her usual torrent of words. "I read a wonderful book called Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. It was written in 1847, but the characters in the book are so real that you feel as if they were living today. When I read this book, I felt as if I were Jane Eyre, a lonely, friendless orphan girl sent away to a cold, cruel boarding school where all the other girls despise her." As Ethan had predicted, Lizzie's report was long. Many sad and terrible things had happened to Jane Eyre, and Lizzie apparently felt she had to describe each one in detail. Lizzie always loved the books in her book reports, but she seemed to love this one extra much. Maybe it was because she and Jane were a lot alike. Maybe because nobody liked either of them. Finally, Lizzie finished. "David Barnett," Miss Leeds called, still smiling. "B, C, D, E, F, G. Why did the alphabet have to have so many letters in it?" David started reluctantly toward the front of the room. To his own surprise, Ethan put up his hand. "Ethan, I was just wondering, do we always have to go in alphabetical order every time?" Miss Leeds kept on smiling her same smile. "Why, no, not at all. Would you like to proceed in a different way today?" It wasn't as if Ethan was exactly eager for his turn. He just was so tired of being last. Though maybe he was looking forward to his report today. "I guess so," he said. "Well, suppose today we go in reverse alphabetical order." "Yes, I think that would be quite a refreshing change. Julius, why don't you go next?" David flashed Ethan a jubilant grin. Ethan knew that David hadn't finished his book yet and was sitting with it open on his desk in the back of the room, trying to turn the pages without Miss Leeds seeing. Julius glared at Ethan. Julius never minded bringing up the rear as the only Z in the entire school. He had once said to Ethan, "The way I look at it, this increases the odds that a tornado or an earthquake or a nuclear bomb will strike before I have to go." "Julius?" Julius walked slowly to the front of the room. In an expressionless monotone, he read from his paper. I read A Boy and a Dog by Maxwell Crumley. It is about a boy and a dog. The rest of Julius's report gave the plot of the book, but it didn't tell anything about the book. You could have boiled down Julius's report to 2 sentences. The boy gets lost on a rafting trip. The dog finds him. At the end of the report, Julius read, "This was an okay book. I would recommend this book to the boy. I would recommend this book to boys who like dogs," and he crumpled up his paper to show that he was finished. "Does anyone have any questions for Julius about the book he selected?" Miss Leeds asked. Her smile was somewhat less bright. No one raised a hand, so she asked, "Where does the story take place? Where is it setting?" "Montana," Julius said, "on a river. The river is where they go rafting." "Were there any other memorable characters in it besides the boy and the dog?" "No," Julius said. "Oh, there's a bear, a grizzly bear. I guess I forgot to mention him." Miss Leeds didn't look completely satisfied, but she turned to Ethan. "Ethan, what about you? What do you have to share?" "I hope both you and Julius chose longer books this time. Remember, class, your book report books must be at least 100 pages. Julius, how long was A Boy and a Dog?" 100 pages, Julius said. He held it up, open to page 100. In the back of the room, someone gulped. "Ethan, I read A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. It has 422 pages. Ethan tried to say it in a matter-of-fact tone, but he couldn't keep the glee out of his voice. Then he read his page. Like Julius's, it told mainly what the book was about. But the plot of A Tale of Two Cities was so complicated that it wasn't that easy to summarize in a page. Basically, there were 2 guys who looked alike, Charles Darnay and Sidney Carton, and they were both in love with the same person, Lucy Manet. Only Darnay got to marry her because he was a nobleman, plus a really wonderful person, and Sidney Carton was a super loser. But then Darnay got arrested and condemned to death, and Sidney Carton helped him escape from prison and went off to be executed in his place because he loved Lucy so much that he was willing to sacrifice himself so that she could be with the man she loved. Over the past 2 weeks, Ethan found himself thinking of Lucy Manet as Grace Gunderson, and every once in a while he was Darnay, but mostly he was Sidney Carton. This is an excellent book, Ethan finished reading. It teaches you about the French Revolution, which took place in the 1790s in the country of France. It is a good book if you like history or violence or exciting suspense. It is a love story, too, so some girls might like it. All in all, it is an excellent book. Ethan started toward his seat. Relief mingled with pride. It was over now, the book and the report. If Link counted for anything, he should get an A+. His report hadn't been as long and flowery as Lizzie's, but it had been more interesting and informative than Julius's. Maybe he'd even get an A for the trimester. If Ethan were the one giving the grades, anyone who read a book with 422 pages would get an A for the year. But when he looked back at Miss Leeds, he saw that she had stopped smiling. "Very nice," she said automatically. "Ethan, would you stay for a moment after class? There's something I need to ask you." "All right, where were we? Timothy Williams, you're next." As the rest of the kids droned on, the class became more and more fidgety. That was another problem with going last. It was hard to talk when everybody was passing notes and doodling on their book covers. Ethan wondered what Miss Leeds wanted to say to him. Maybe she wanted to apologize to him for all those times they had gone in the usual order, or for acting last time as if he were retarded for picking a short book. The bell rang before Daniel Brotman and David Barnett had their turns. David was doing his best to look disappointed. "First thing tomorrow, boys," Miss Leeds told them. Ethan put his notebook in his backpack and waited to see what Miss Leeds had to say. Julius walked past him out to the hall without a word. Ethan wished he didn't know what Julius was thinking, but he did. "Some vice president of Losers Incorporated, you are." "Hey, Julius, wait for me. I'll only be a minute," Ethan called after him. Ethan didn't know if Julius would wait or not, but then he saw his friend slide down to the floor just outside Miss Leeds' door. "Ethan," Miss Leeds spoke stiffly, I don't quite know how to say this to you. But I would rather you read the shortest possible book, as Julius did, rather than rely on plot summaries to pretend you read something you didn't read. Ethan stared at her. But I did read A Tale of Two Cities. Did you, Ethan? Miss Leeds' smile was horrible now. Am I supposed to believe that one of my 6th grade students read over 400 pages in 2 weeks? A boy whose last book was on a 3rd grade reading level? Lizzie reads long books. What else could Ethan say? He had no proof that he had read the book. Was he supposed to have made a videotape of all the dozens of hours he had spent reading it? Lizzie is an avid reader. Anyone can tell from the real passion in Lizzie's book reports that she lives in the worlds of the books she reads. Ethan, I am not going to penalize you this time. I know many students crib their reports from book jackets, but this was so blatant that I had to give you at least a warning. But I did read it, Ethan repeated stubbornly. He had a sudden painful thought. He was willing to bet anything he owed that when Peter had read The Yearling for his book report in 6th grade, Miss Leeds hadn't accused him of pretending to have read it. He had another entry for Life Isn't Fair after all. I wish I could believe you, Miss Leeds said. All right, Ethan, you may go. So much for Ethan's A+, so much for reverse alphabetical order, so much for trying not to be a loser. Suddenly Julius was by his side, pale, his eyes blinking the way they did whenever he was upset about something. Ethan did read the book, Julius almost shouted. The whole stinking book. I saw him. We all saw him. Go ask Miss Dorkin what Ethan's been reading every day in study hall. Go ask your precious Lizzie. She saw him reading it last week. I told him he didn't have to read the whole thing, but he did. He read every single stinking page, all 422 of them. Ethan didn't say anything. He had been all right a minute ago, furious, disgusted, sick to his stomach, but all right. Now he was afraid he might cry. Julius had spoken with such angry intensity that no one could think he was lying to save his friend. I'm sorry, Ethan, Miss Leeds said softly. She looked as if she was going to cry. The whole thing was becoming more embarrassing by the minute. I shouldn't have doubted you. It was just that. Please accept my apology. Ethan turned to go. It didn't matter anyway. Out in the hall, he and Julius hurried on to social studies without speaking. Then as they reached the classroom, Ethan made himself mutter, "Thanks." Julius looked away. I hope it was worth it, he said in a low voice, getting to go first, reading the longest book, telling everybody how wonderful it was. Do you know who you remind me of these days? Ethan didn't answer. He knew it wasn't Peter. It was the lizard.